Hello, you moon landing malt marauders, and thank you to Mischief Maker for that malt mention. I'm Ralphie in the Bothy. Welcome to the Bothy. It's somewhere, not anywhere, but it could be anywhere, but it is somewhere in the middle of the Irish Sea, surrounded by tempests and storms. But this particular location, which is called the Bothy, is an oasis of peacefulness, calmness, tranquility, and malt moments. And the malt that I'm going to introduce you to you today, or should I say, the malt I'm going to introduce to you today for you is this. This is an independent bottling, and I'm going to tell you all about it. I'm going to smell it, taste it, review it, give it a malt mark, and basically tell you how fantastic it is. And I know that already some of you are saying, hey Ralphie, that's not available where I am. I can't get hold of a bottle of that. Okay, if you're in the UK and Britain, Scotland, you can. It's not difficult to get a hold of a bottle of this style of whisky, which is a cask strength, integrity, independent bottling. But we can't get it where we are, so what's the point of even reviewing it? Good question. I'll answer that question for you. For the simple reason, to make you aware of it, to generate more interest in these style of bottlings of whisky, and to help the growing number of small independent bottlers who are focusing more on quality and giving you the full fat version of single malt Scotch whisky, which you get with single cask, cask strength, unchill filtered and natural colour bottles of whisky. And furthermore, to add a little bit of interest to this situation, they tend to be bottling the more obscure, less known, non-branded single malts that you may have never heard of. Now, there's very, very few reviewers are actually going to talk about these, because it's easy to go out and get a bottle of 12-year-old Glenlivet, Glenfiddich, Macallan, non-age statement Macallan, and then just talk about it and say it's malty and fruity and wonderful. That's easy. And there's plenty of folk, good on them, that can do that for you. So the reviews are already out there, malt mates. But here in the Bothy, we go deeper. We take you further. The journey is more interesting. The journey is simply more complex. And I am fully aware that when I review and mention these styles of single malt Scotch whisky now, in the future, and it could be a lot sooner than you think, because more importers are now, as well as showing official brands to customers, they're looking to have independent bottlings as well. Certainly I know of 2 independent bottlers that can't keep up with the demand for their whisky in Taiwan and South Korea and Vietnam and Singapore. There's growing awareness, and with growing awareness comes growing demand, and with growing demand, an increase in availability. And I feel here in the Bothy that I'm paving the way for this. I know that many of you watching do not have access to independent bottlings. Your options are very restricted, if you have them even at all. And therefore, for someone online to tell you about them, to give you some sort of guidance and help you with your bearings, is going to make the choice of whisky so much easier for you in the future, if they're not already available to you. This is a really worthy version. This is an ideal version of an integrity independent bottling. And I'm going to give you a few details even before I start to smell it and taste it and give you a malt mark. So buckle up, malt mates, because we're in a treasure hunt here. And I've found treasure. I'm sharing it with you. Tawny Port, well, so I'll start at the front label before we go to the back label. So Watt Whisky, single malt Scotch whisky from Watt Whisky Independent Bottlers, which is a small independent bottler. It's just a team of 2 people, but they have access to good stock, they have experience, they know what they're doing. It just so happens that where I am, this is available to me at the moment, and I'm buying it because it's what I can get my hands on. And like yourself, I'm not planning to review too many bad whiskies because I'm paying for these with my money. It's my money that buys this. I want to buy good whiskies so that in my reviews I can keep the message more positive rather than perpetually giving you bad news about the stuff that you'll find in supermarkets going further downhill. That's one reason why you never see me review an official bottling of Isle of Jura single malt. Seriously, I never buy the stuff. I know what to expect. And the thing is, Jura is a great distillery. It can produce great whisky, fantastic whisky. It's just the way it bottles, it's bottled, it's dumbed down. It ends up in discount, and there's a reason for that. Distilled at Othroysk, or Othrusk, we'll call it Othroysk Distillery. More about that shortly. Aged 13 years, bottled at 54.9%. In other words, you can put a match to this. This has been matured for 6 months, just 6 months, in a Tawny Port hogshead, selected by Mark and Kate Watt, who are the proprietors of this. So they're basically what they're saying, this is personal, we're picking the casks that get bottled. It is one of 318 bottles. It comes from a single cask. It has spent most of its time, 12.5 years, being matured in probably an ex-bourbon cask, which gave competent enough results, but the whisky needed extra. Do we have time for me to explain this to you? Basically, when independent bottlers are buying whisky on the secondary market, you don't normally get the best of casks. You don't. You get jobbing casks, what's called cobble cask. Now, there's no harm in that, but often they don't let the whisky shine and sparkle. They just hold the liquor, they mature it, they give a competent enough job, but frankly, it's nothing special. So you've got 2 options. One, you let the whisky continue to mature in the cask 14, 15, 18, 21 years until it does eventually take on the sensation of age, and basically, because it's been a less active cask, the integrity of the signature of the original single malt is more intact. Classic example, Port Ellens. All the time. It says in the back of the label, and I will quote, "This bottling is non-chill filtered and natural colour." And there you go. This is what we're looking for. So independent bottlers, they can't lose a mediocre cask in the big batch, like Bowmore can, Macallan can, Glenfiddich can, Glenlivet can. The big volume producers. And furthermore, the volume producers, they're catering for a passive market, a consumer market. That's why they chill filter and they dumb down the whisky, and it helps to control the price as well, because when you go further out into the mass market, the whisky has to be discounted before people buy it, and people are tightening their purse strings. So it's a very different market for the big distillery that are volume producers, and they need to get the volume out there to keep the wheels of their business rolling. That's just what they have to do. And I don't blame them for it, and I don't judge them for it. I'm not being a snob about it, malt mates. All I'm doing is telling you this is the lie of the land, and it's great because people can start their whisky journey with your 40% chill filtered, caramel enhanced whiskies. It's actually a good place to start. These are just too frightening and threatening and too strong for people that haven't had whiskey before, or maybe have only been drinking whiskey for a few months, or even worse, just drinking whiskey in bars. But there comes a point, a tipping point in our journey, in our experience, where we just want to go further. We want to increase the value of our malt moments, and this is where we end up going. We go treasure hunting for treasures like this. On the nose, big, because there's a lot of alcohol in here. The alcohol carries the flavour, and it's big. It's a tawny port cask, not a red port cask. We know all about the red port casks. They turn the whiskey a slightly ruby colour, a rosy colour. And then what they do is they give these strawberries and raspberries and cranberries and a bit of rhubarb and a little bit of red fruit notes. And the engagement doesn't last too long, because a little bit of port cask goes a long, long way. And that is why, even though the finish on this whiskey has only been 6 months, the fact is it only needed 6 months. Such was the activity of the cask. I'm reading loud and clear that the cask used, and they cost quite a lot of money these days, was a fresh, wet, emptied tawny port cask. And malt mates, I want to share something with you. I love tawny port. Tawny port is good value Madeira. When Madeira is not great when it's young and far too expensive when it's old, you're looking for a tawny port. Just saying. Dried fruit. Rich. Lots of barley sugar. Interesting little savoury note in here. But I'll come back to this shortly, because it's part of the profile of I'll say that, start that again. Othroysk. First taste. Boom. Boom. But it's not a shock. So much flavour in there. You think, my goodness, all that alcohol and I'm not getting too much nip. You're not getting too much nip because you're getting lots of cask. And then at the finish in the palate, first taste, you start to really notice the savoury aspect of the single malt, which is the Othroysk signature. Naturally, me being me, you know my script. I'm going to add water. I'm going to add 1 teaspoon and a half teaspoons. So I'm really cutting it down, because the alcoholic strength is so high that if I don't, all I'm going to do is get condensed whiskey. I won't get the detail. I won't get the fine tuning of it. I won't get the full dynamics of the cask, and I certainly won't get the real personality of the single malt that was matured in that cask. For those that think saliva is enough to reduce the strength of a cask strength whiskey, good luck to you. You're having part of the journey, you're having not all of it. It's an opinion, but I'm just telling you what you need to know, because this is what you do need to know. I've added some water. While it's settling down, while it's opening up, while it's developing in the glass, because the alcoholic strength has been reduced, let me tell you a little bit about Othroysk. It's a big distillery. You'll find it in Speyside, and you've probably never heard of it, because it's blend filler. It's not a fashionable whiskey. It's a kind of awkward one. It's an awkward single malt. You get raisins and you get barley sugar, but you also get something, in my opinion, which is slightly industrial. It's slightly sort of workshoppy. Slightly, some people would call it rubbery. But it's not a highly regarded classic single malt signature. But in this instance, it doesn't really matter, because it's a powerful signature, because it spent most of its life in a relatively weak cask until it met the tawny port cask, which is absolute of 5-star quality. Then the magic appears. Right. But to conclude about Othroysk, it's a very young distillery. Fairly generic, but handled with care. It can be one of the hidden savoury and umami single malts of Scotland. but we just don't see enough of it. And to be honest, and I have to warn you, malt mates, quite a number of Ruysk bottlings, when it's not done right, and independent bottlers can get it wrong, it's just a duffer. So you have to follow the clues. And you're not just asking your mate and asking advice, you're developing your own malt senses for sniffing out the better versions when you see the coordinates are in place to suggest it is. So, back to the flavour, back to the smell. Wonderfully barley sugar, slightly savoury, slightly umami, hint of mint, toffee, vanilla, raisin, dates, definitely. We're talking brown fruits, dates and figs, preserved fruits. High sugar preserved fruits, raisins, dates and figs. So you don't have super sweet. What you have is sweet complex. Really interesting nose. In the development of the nose, in the latter part of the nose, particularly as you're drawing your nose away from the glass, you start to know a natural complexity as the presence, the initial blast of the cask subsides, and then the single malt starts to express its presence more dynamically and dramatically. Taste. This is all about the cask balancing off an awkward single malt and doing it like a masterclass. The cask has been a total boss, but such is the substance and presence of the single malt that it's not just a swamp. You're not just a tawny port overcoat. It's far more dynamic than that. Wonderfully clean, fresh, articulate, expressive. As you know, because you have some experience, you get your sherry monsters and you get your peat monsters. But there are other kinds of monsters in Scotch whisky. This is what you would call a malt monster, because the dried fruit presence coming from a really, really good tawny port cask is absolutely enhancing and taming an awkward, difficult to like single malt, and doing so in such a way that they both come together beautifully. The cask in 6 months has really bonded with the single malt. And even more, when you're tasting it, after repeat tastings, you start to separate the cask from the single malt, and you see that awkwardness, that eccentricity in the single malt. You can understand why it's blend filler. You can understand why it's really used to round off an overly sweet blended Scotch whisky, where there's too much sweetness in the mixed mash bill column still whisky, which has been dominated by corn, and you get that. This is just a great single malt for balancing it off. Another good one that I would just mention that's kind of similar to Ruysk is Loch Lomond. It's that same kind of characteristics. Back to the taste. A masterclass of letting nature do what it does best. For 13 years old, this is an awful lot of whisky. It is singular. It is lots of character. It's really good quality. It's not got old flavours like bookcases and tobacco and leather that you get in old whiskies, which are more sedate, which are more pedestrian in the way they evolve in the glass. This is far more dynamic. And what it does really, really well. For me, having been drinking single malt for 30 years, tasting this is genuinely exciting. It's got a little bit of age. It's got some real zesty youthfulness. It's got the full presence of a quality cask, and it's got the best behaviour version of an awkward single malt. Fantastic. Let's give this a malt mark, an integrity malt mark. I like giving these marks, malt mates, because it's happening less and less these days. So I'm in a treasure hunt here, and I'm sharing what treasure I find with you. Sure, they're hard to find. The chances are this is probably already sold out because it's single cask. There's only a few hundred bottles, but don't forget, please let me reassure you, when you register in the comments your disappointment that you cannot get hold of this bottle, there will be others. And when they arrive, you will know to expect their arrival. You have been prepared. You have been advised. Some of them will be not very good. Some of these bottlings will be crap, actually, and not value for money at all. Other bottlings will be remarkable, and some will be absolutely stunningly good. You've got to do your homework. You've got to do your Sherlock Holmes to find them, just in the same way as I am, and I have to. And sometimes, be reassured, sometimes I get it wrong, but not with this one. 90 out of 100, it's a malt mark for Watt Whiskies. Independent bottling, cask strength, full fat, unchill filtered, natural colour, crash bang wallop. Orthroisk single malt whisky. Now, if you pop back again shortly for Ralphie Review 944 Extras, I shall be talking about making malt moments. That's what I'm going to talk. I'm going to keep it nice and simple. Making malt moments. Just a nice little conversational about how you go about finding a good whisky and holding on to it for as long as you can as an experience. Because ultimately, we're either drinking alcohol to get pished as passive consumers, or we are not. We're drinking alcohol, responsibility, focusing on quality, because the quality of the engagement enhances the quality of our life. Simple equation, and it's simply true. As above, so below. As above, so below. That's the way it goes. It's the nature of the universe and beyond. The nature of the multiverse. I'm Ralphie. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you've enjoyed this and you've not yet subscribed, because then you'll get updates as to when there's more malt moments of good, decent quality single malt whisky. So when you're going out to buy liquor, whatever liquor you're buying, you'll be better informed. If you're better informed, you buy better value and you have less disappointment with the money you spend. Simple equation. You can also join me in my Patreon site, Patreon Ralphie at patreon.com, where you get extra content and you get bi-monthly live streams, and I go into a bit more detail. I do a bit more of a deep dive in whiskey. Some of these videos that I do, these extra videos, they're quite light-hearted, they're quite chatty, and others are much more exploratory. I'm Ralphie. Thank you for watching. You, malt mates, I'm just telling you, you're wonderful.